Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Jay Singh, and I'm the founder of Publication Academy, your online training partner for higher ed career advancement and professional development. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today for this installment of our Career Pathways series, Exiting Academia. Today we have a fascinating interview with Dr. Olivia Awate, who successfully transitioned from completing a PhD in biomedical sciences into the exciting industry vertical of government. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Over now to our amazing Publication Academy interviewer, Dr. Gertrude Nantra.
Hello, everyone. Dr. G. Nontra here, and today I am super excited to have Dr. Olivia Awate with me. Welcome, Dr. Awate.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Absolutely. I'm so excited for this conversation. So, Olivia, tell us about your educational background and what triggered your desire to work outside of academia.
Okay, so first of all, I moved to the US about 12 years ago. I came from Senegal, West Africa, and my plan was to come and go to medical school. And because I had studied medical school back home, then I moved here. I had to start over. And since I didn't have a SAT score, I started at a community college. Then from there, I was so focused on, medical school. And then actually, I was in the honors program. One of the director of the honors program kind of forced me to try this internship opportunity over the summer. And that's how I actually got introduced to research. Because where I'm from, like research is not really common. Most people thought I was trying to become a phlebotomist, which was not the case. So I then from the community college, I moved into the four-year university that I was doing the internship at over the summer. And then after my bachelor, I felt like I didn't have enough experience in terms of research. I decided to do a one-year postbac program. So this is one that's like an NIH funded one, but it's not the one where you would go on the NIH campus because I know that some people have difficulty also trying to find those. So the one I was doing was called the PrEP program. So it's funded by the NIH, but it's at specific universities itself. And that program basically preps you to get into the PhD program. And so it was a one year of research and taking graduate level classes, and they will help you with your application process for the PhD. Then I got into the PhD program at the at Virginia Commonwealth University. Then after I was about to finish my second year, my advisor decided to move at Georgia State University. So the option that I had was either move with her or start over in a different lab. And at that point, the department that I was in was not necessarily um, I was in the microbiology department and it was a little bit falling apart. And some of the research, some of the people I would want to stay with maybe didn't have funding. So I moved to Georgia State with my advisor in the Institute for Biomedical Science. So from there, I just finished my PhD this past December. And and actually, while going through my undergraduate degree, I was a TA for a course. And I realized, and it was not a course that was just like for all the students. It was like very specific honor students that were picked for that course. And I think throughout the teaching, because it was actually a teaching lab, I really enjoyed doing that. But the part that I didn't enjoy was, every time you had the students like it was two labs at the same time. So you would go in one room and then go to the next, and you would see that it seems like in one room the students were like listening and paying attention. The other one, they were not at all. And I was like, I don't know how much of this I can do. So. I think I realized really early on that teaching was not for me. And as I was going through graduate school, I think seeing how academics was going, I think I felt like sometimes, I do know that PEIs do have some administrative responsibilities, things like that. But I feel like sometimes you get to a point where they have too much of it, and it's almost like the students are kind of like falling through the cracks. So for me, it was one thing where I was like, I don't think I want to do that or want to be that. And also the fact that also with academia, it's like so much you put in so much work into it, and it's like, let's be honest, people don't get paid as well either. And honestly, by the time you finish your PhD and you're trying to get to a postdoc, most people will probably already have a family. So you also need to sustain your family and all of those things in between. So.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's a lot to unpack and a lot to share, because I think I had some similar experiences where I did enjoy teaching in my case. I didn't enjoy the
Mhm.
research part of it. But I was looking at my teaching pay and I'm like, this is not going to sustain my family. So I totally identify with that. So let's move on to talking about what you do now.
Yeah, so now I have started a position at the FDA. I am doing a postdoctoral fellowship at the FDA. My background, even though my degree is translational biomedical science, I was mostly working in microbiology with Neisseria gonorrhea. Now I'm doing something completely different. So I'm working in the food science area, which has nothing to do really with microbiology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So, what does a day to day look like for you in your current role in food science at the FDA? What does that look like?
So the current role right now, I'm mostly like learn because I'm only just starting my fifth month into the position, so I'm still like, learning a lot of things. But my day to day is mostly me coming to lab, doing experiments because I'm actually the only one in my lab, really. We have an undergrad who's part-time, who goes to school here at the University of Maryland. So I'm the only one in the lab, so I do have a project that I'm working on. And thankfully, some of the experiments are type of experiments I used to do before. So it's more about the foundational things and the information, the background that I had to, more dig more into. Um, yeah.
Absolutely. So I totally get what you're saying. So you were working with Nigeria
Mhm.
in your graduate program, then you move into this position with the FDA, and it's not Nigeria, it's not microbiology at all.
Yeah.
It's food science. But the biggest, and I heard what you said at the end there, the biggest thing is really learning the foundational stuff for
Mhm.
your project, right?
Yeah.
Which, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about transferable skills and all that. But how does one go about finding a job with the FDA?
So that one, I'm not gonna lie, I think I was a little bit lucky. I did apply to lots of position in the government because I already knew I didn't want to do academia, so I was focusing mostly on government and industry jobs when I was applying, and I got a lot of rejection and a lot. So, but for this position, I think what happened was this position has been open for a while, and they were looking, and I think they didn't have too much people applying into it, and I think also some of my transferable skills did play a role into it. But yeah, I did just go into the Zintellect website and fill up the questions and try to put as much information as possible and fill every answer and make sure that they have also a section in the questionnaire where it's like, have you had this type of experiment or like have you had this amount of experience with doing the specific thing? Let's say they might say, oh, writing experience. Have you had at least like 18 months of writing experience, something like that? Because I think some of these questions they do kind of weed out to begin with. So when you have a few no's, that you probably your application might not be able to go through the next process. So there is that also. So I realized that being able to, at least have something where I know that I could answer yes to everything, and for all the short answer part, put all of my experience and also use the keywords, So if in the description they're talking about, let's say something like, oh, you need to be able to do Western blots or ELISAs, and you have that experience, you need to make sure that you use those keywords and really focus on what the description asks and use some of those words that they have there into your application.
Absolutely. So that's really helpful. So you had mentioned, I want, you went through a lot in a short
Hmm.
amount of time, but I want us to talk about the website. You said the website was Intellect. What's the
Zintellect, so
full
it's
Z
Z
Z
Zintellect, yeah, yeah.
Z
So
Y or Z I?
ZI, just like
Z I
intellect with a Z in front,
with
yeah,
the Z.
Zintellect.
Yeah. So Zintellect.gov or .com?
I think it's .gov. I
.gov.
believe that's
Okay.
.gov.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you go in there. Do you have to create an account or anything
Yeah,
like that?
you do have to create an account. So in the Zintellect, actually, you can kind of try to filter the position based on the location and also based of some specific areas that you're looking at. So you have keywords you can type in, and it would just show you everything, and you can see on the right hand side if it's something that's like postgraduate, postdoc, things like that. You'll be able to know what type of level they're also looking for. And also some more of the application I did were more on USA jobs, so that one also you have to create an account for. Yeah,
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
yeah,
So, Zintellect, for those who are listening, zintellect.gov, then usajobs.gov, right?
yeah.
And so those two are really helpful. One of the things that has come up in these conversations I've been having with other PhDs and academics who chose to work outside of academia are the other ways in which they have found jobs. And so, for instance, they knew somebody who had gone to a company and then they got in touch
Mhm,
with them, and those conversations, they were able to apply for an upcoming job. So
mhm.
basically leveraging their network or people that they knew. Did you have to do anything like that?
I actually did. I went to a conference sometime in September, and I knew that because that was a conference that was specifically Nigeria related, so I knew I would probably see people from like the CDC. So I kind of stopped on the conference trying to figure out where the posters were at. So I went and talked to those people directly. And there was one person in particular. I remember when I went to talk to her, she told me that she's a contractor at the CDC. She's not necessarily like a CDC employee. And I was
Right.
telling her that even if you are a contractor, I feel like there isn't, it's not like there is a list out there that tells you these people are contractors that would work with the CDC. So, and I was asking her, I was like, it's kind of hard to figure out where to begin from there. And then so I
Right.
gave her my email address and my phone number and everything. And then she really kindly emailed me a list of like contracting agency that would really go with the CDC. And she also told me she could actually give me a referral also. So she told me about her company and I went there. She told me if I saw some position that I was interested in when applying to just put her name down, in the section where it's like or referral or something like that. So I did. And I was able to get an interview for that one. Unfortunately that position didn't work out. I honestly didn't have that much experience for that because it was a lot of bioinformatics. So yeah.
But then in your job search process, thank you for sharing that. In your job search process, you basically leverage the conference to, okay, I'm going
Yeah.
to find people that I can talk to, and they
Yeah.
could help me get me, and I think I went through a similar experience when I was trying to get into medical communications. Is I talked to people. They didn't directly lead me to a job, but having those
Hmm.
conversations were helpful for my own
Hmm.
knowledge, for knowing what to put on my resume, for knowing how to
Yep.
communicate my skills. So,
Yeah.
it's helpful. So for those also watching again, like when you go to conferences, don't keep to yourself. Talk to
Yeah.
people, right? It's a good
Yeah.
idea to
Yeah.
talk to people.
Yeah. Because I was really like stalking the people I knew. I was like, okay, this specifically, this is the area I want to go to. So I talked to different people. She was not the only one. I talked to other people. I talked to somebody who works in Europe, and she's more in like public health related field and things like that. And actually, this person from the contractor I just mentioned, she was also nice enough to also share her resume because she was like, okay, because I sent her my resume, she asked me to send it to her, and she said, oh, maybe you should fix this area. There's some things you
Yeah.
should fix, and she sent me her resume as a template. So I that also helped. I also fixed my resume based on what she said, even though I had like other people help me with my resume also, but I also tailor it because I felt like the other people that helped me were more familiar with academia, which the resume is slightly different. So I fixed mine based on her template also, which helped a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's great. That's great. Thanks for sharing that with us,
yeah.
Olivia. Thank you so much. So let's talk about maybe what was you finished in December. Did you
Mhm.
get a job with the FDA right after you finished? How far out did you start preparing? And maybe what was the hardest part of, I know, three questions, right? G. So the first question is, you finished in December. When did you start working at the FDA?
Mhm. So I finished in December. I started working actually January 8th, but my defense was early November. So
Early
December was more like the graduation, but the
Graduation.
defense were early November, yeah. And I started January 8th. That was my official date, yeah.
Official date. And
Yeah.
how far out did you start looking?
So that was a bit tricky because it was hard for me to figure out when to start. I felt like sometimes when I was telling my advisor, she's like, "Oh, with what we want to do, you don't want to start too early because some people might want to fill a position like sooner
Right.
than when you're going to be done." And it was hard to pinpoint because obviously towards the end, sometimes it's a battle with the advisor to let you go, trying to figure out when I'm going to be done, when I'm going to be done. So I think that actually made it a little bit tricky, but I still try to apply um, a little bit further out, especially when I knew I started writing. I decided, okay, because I had my writing schedule for my thesis, as I was getting closer, like maybe, I don't know, like as I was seeing the progression at which I was going for my writing, I was like, okay, maybe I can make it by this date. And then so maybe it makes sense for me to apply. So I know that some of the job applications I did with uh, even NIH and CDC were like all the way in August. So I know that I had applications in August and I didn't defend until November.
Okay.
So I started, I guess like let's say 4 months out, or maybe like July. I think I definitely had one in July. So let's say 5 months out or something.
You
I started
started looking.
applying. Yeah,
Okay. Okay, that's a good time frame to that's a good time
yeah,
frame. Thank you for sharing that.
and
What do you
and
think was the
also
hardest? Yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, and also there's the fact that with the government, I mean, it depends on how soon they're looking to fill the position because they will tell you when the closing date is, and usually during their description, they will tell you they want somebody to start by a specific time frame. So that
Right.
with that, I was very, very confused. I had a very difficult time with that because I realized that actually when they say they want somebody, let's say to start August 31st, that's not a hard set rule. So if you were
Mm,
to apply and they take you and you maybe are not ready to start August 31st, you can always negotiate. They'll allow you to come a little bit later. So,
right.
because at first I was like, okay, why would they have, let's say, an application that closed September 15 and you want somebody who start August 31st? It was very confusing for me
Yeah.
for that part. So I would just tell people don't get discouraged by the fact that they say, oh, they want somebody to start by this date or whatever. So
Right.
as long as the job application is still open, just apply. And yeah.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. What
Yeah.
was the hardest part of moving from academia to the FDA?
The hardest part, I think, for me is it's a very different environment altogether. So even starting for me, I was like, okay, everything is very slow because by the time they do all the background check, everything, by the time you get situated, everything is really, really slow. So I think for me, that was one of the hardest part because I was like, okay, to me, it was a lot of uncertainties because I'm like, what if they decide to, just drop me because they was so slow. But then I guess also once I started, the other thing I had to remind myself was like, okay, this is not, you're not in academia where you like going in all the time trying to finish your project to defend because obviously when you're going towards the end, you're pushing so much, but here it's like a slower pace. So I have to kind of like adjust myself, and even at some point, like sometimes I would feel guilty. I'm like, oh, maybe I need to do more. And it's a little bit slow paced. So I think the difficult part for me really, really was the onboarding part and the uncertainty of when it's going to be done because I actually moved from Georgia all the way to Maryland, which was a big move. I had to move my husband, so it's like that and that transition part I think was the hardest. But once you're in, I feel like it was fairly good. Like most people are very nice, so that part at least helped a lot. They're very
Yeah.
helpful and nice. So
Yeah. The moving, moving from Georgia to Maryland, having to be I knew somebody who was applying for government jobs, and she made a similar comment about, wow, it takes so long to get
mhm,
everything, because
yeah,
it's the US government, and they want to make sure they have the right backgrounds of people working
yeah,
for them. So that thanks for
yeah,
sharing that. What transferable
yeah.
skills, I mean, now you're working in a lab at the
Hmm.
FDA. You're using a
Yes.
lot of the skills that you probably developed, as a researcher in academia.
Yeah.
But what other transferable skills would you say have been helpful to you?
So I think um, Some of the ones I've been using, so I've done a lot of ELISAs in my background, and I came here. And funny enough, when I, as a grad student, I did not like ELISAs because they didn't used to work for me. I did so many uh, troubleshooting with ELISA. It was a headache. I made it work, thankfully, but then once I got this job, actually, when I was leaving, I remember the research associate in my lab was asking me, "So what are you going to be doing?" I was like, "Believe it or not, I'll be doing ELISAs almost every time here." So it's mostly like Liza's and Western blots that I'm applying. Those are the only really like similarity. But besides that, I guess, having to read a lot of papers before would allow you to, being able to delve into this new material and digging through it and kind of trying to figure out how to, go about it. Having lab meetings would allow, that also knowing how the meetings would go, maybe help you get prepared also for, having branch meeting here, things like that. Um, but yeah, so it's mostly everything really that I used to do pretty much. Besides that, weighing samples, making solution, that's just standard, so that's just something that was easy to do anyway. But the biggest things that I've brought with me that I use here on a daily is really like Liza's and Western blots. Besides that, I'm learning new things like interestingly, I'm like learning to make yogurt and making sourdough to test those because we're doing like method validation to look at gluten level, especially because it affect people with celiac disease. And usually when food is hydrolyzed, like fermented or things like that, it's hard to detect the levels of gluten, even though it's still there. So that's what my work really has to do. So that's like I have that interesting part where I'm like, making food in the lab first before I can work and test it. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that's so cool.
yeah.
For those who may be watching who are not familiar with ELISAs or Western blots, an ELISA is simply an assay used in scientific labs to measure the amount of protein in a sample. And a Western blot does a similar thing, but in a
Yeah.
slightly different way. So they're just two different ways of measuring proteins in a sample
Mhm.
that you have. And so, yes, you're doing a lot of those. And yeah, I know, I remember ELISA so much and how I did not enjoy them. They were the simpler things, they were the simpler, experiment in my
Mhm.
workflows, but yeah, I get it. I get it when people say they don't enjoy it.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. As we land the plane, right, for somebody who is in a similar position to you that you were like a few months ago, who wants to work in government, who wants to work in the FDA, what advice would you give them?
So the advice I would give them is just keep applying and don't just apply in one position. Apply for multiple one, because I feel like these are positions that a lot of people are looking for. So a lot of people are looking into the government position. So just keep applying. Don't get discouraged and know that the government is slow. So sometimes people won't reach out until maybe 2 months after you did the application, which I believe this one actually, I don't want to lie, but I think I applied maybe back in August. I completely had forgotten about it, and somebody reached out to me in October. So just, don't despair, but just keep applying and then apply to as many as possible. As long as you know you have the transferable skill, don't just get limited by, okay, I've never done this, I've never done that because in a completely different field. So yeah,
Yeah, in a completely different field.
yeah,
Thank you, Dr. Awate, so much
yeah,
for chatting with me. This was great.
yeah. Thank you.